Welcome to this week's episode of Good Company. In this episode, we sit down with Tracey Finnegan from Connect Ed, who's changing the way that healthcare professionals, and more importantly, patients, look at healthcare, their symptoms, and bringing a world-first solution to the masses. Enjoy the episode. Tracey Finnegan, thank you so much for joining the show.
Thanks, Dylan. Thanks for having me.
How are you today?
Yeah, not too bad. I'm here. That's always a good start for the day.
Before the camera rolled, we were talking about autism and just some of the creative minds that are coming out of that. Let's keep going. What do you got?
Yeah, look, I just think if you look back in human history, every great mind that's ever lived, you could look at them and they would probably meet the diagnostic criteria for, for an autistic spectrum disorder. And I think that that's consistent with what we see even today. If you look around, most people who are successful in business in particular, I suspect, are people who are somewhere on that spectrum. And you need to be, because in order to be a good business, to be successful in business, you've got to have a creative brain. You can't do this unless you're a creative thinker, creative problem solver. And I think that that's where that kind of neurological brain structure is really beneficial.
Inverted thinking is maybe where the opportunity is a lot of the time.
Oh, totally. The ability to 180 everything is a skill base. Because that's one of the things I tell my kids to do this. It's, if you're faced with a problem or a challenge and you're kind of unsure about it, and business throws these things at us all of the time, we have our own biases that we always run with first. So this is that, we'll always have our immediate response to anything. Whereas one of the things that I've learned over time, and probably the hard way, to be perfectly honest, along the way, is the value of pausing. And then I say, so you can think what you think, but you may not be right. And the best way to test, and it's kind of the scientist coming out of me, I guess, it's this testing your own hypotheses. Do the 180, so flip it. So flip the narrative and then see what it looks like from that other side, because that will tell you an awful lot about what your decision is about what might, be evoked from that decision that you've made.
It's so funny, and I don't mean to cut in there. This morning, I actually just presented this morning, and slide 3, 4, and 5 was idea to customer or idea to market, and it was the market will decide you need to test your ideas. Yeah. The second slide to that was what's the risk? And it's funny because we had a room full of people, and one of the ladies sort of threw her hand up and she's like, I've got this idea. I've sat on it for 6 months. I haven't gone forward. And while she was mid-sentence, I went next slide and it was like, right, well, what's the risk here? And the risk, when it boiled down, was that she had to let go of control of the possible outcome. And that's obviously the risk that you take in business every day, no matter what field you're in, right? So, and once she sort of said this out loud, which is why I love this so much, she'd said it, and knowing that there's 30 other people in the room waiting on her to come to her own conclusion on it, she's like, you know what, I really need to test it in the market. That's where it is. That's who's going to tell me.
That's right.
And then the next slide was like potential outcome. And it was so good because within a 30-second spread, you could say, she's decided, right, this idea is only an idea unless it's acted on. Mm-hmm. The market will decide what it is. I'll put it out there and see.
Yeah.
And I was so happy because, at the end of the whole thing, she sort of said, "Look, I've pulled the trigger. Since we've been here, there's 2 people coming in, and I'm going to go forward."
Oh, that's awesome.
And I think that it's so much about everyone has these ideas, but coming back to maybe that inverted thinking. Some people just don't mind what the outcome is and they're prepared to put it in the market and find out.
Yeah, and they're the risk takers. So these are people with a high tolerance for risk. I think that business is full of, I think that's a spectrum. So risk aversion is a spectrum behaviour. And I think depending on where you sit on that spectrum depends on how you will operate within your business. So I consider myself to be a moderate risk taker, so calculated risk taker.
Okay.
So I'm really, one of the things I think that, you've always got to be, and again, this goes to having an autistic brain, is being able to see and leverage opportunity when it presents itself. So this is the concept of being nimble in business, which can be tricky. I think, again, when you've got a neuroplastic brain, being nimble actually is naturally easier. I have hypermobility, so I actually think that everything in my body, including my brain, is more flexible than everybody, and that's part of the whole picture. But I think that, there's some people in business who are inherent risk takers, and more the power to them, because they're the gamblers. So this is that you can take this out into, social groupings, I guess. They're the gamblers within the mix. Someone like me, I tend to look at risk from a calculated perspective. So I invert the thinking, identify. This is good problem solving too, by the way. This is wicked problem solving 101. You've got to keep asking why till you get to the root of the problem. So the real problem is never the first thing that you think you have identified. There's always layers of stuff going on, and then you'll get to the heart of it by asking why and why and why till you just can't ask anymore. And again, that's something I've learned to do. I think, so I tend to invert my thinking, try and, whiteboard essentially, mind map in my head the risks, the opportunities, the pitfalls, what is the market, what is the market currently saying about this thing, blah, blah, blah. What is the market asking for? Can we target that? Because that's another thing I think, it's one of the ways I go about business is looking before I leap, or in terms of before I launch, probably not so much before I leap. I look at the market in terms of the client base, because in my case, they're kind of, I'm not sure how I would term my customers, because they're patients mostly, or people who have chronic illness. I think it's that, I try and account for all of those things as best I can, because you can't do it 100%. And that way then I can kind of make a really good educated guess as to whether or not I'm able to tolerate the risk in front of me, and do I need to tweak a few edges in order to reduce that risk if it's a little bit too much. So I'm not a silly risk taker, but I'm equally not averse to risk either. So I think I'm just a careful, I'm really good at, I think I'm really good at seeing opportunity, being nimble. I think my nursing background probably enforced that to a great degree, because I'm an intensive care nurse by profession, and you need to be really super nimble in that context because you're dealing with the unknown all the time.
That's where I want to go. I want to go back to, so interesting, some of the things that we're going to unpack here. But coming out of school, let's go back to just that point, right? So out of school, career one, first job. Talk me through that.
Registered nurse. So reached sort of 17, I was 17 when I finished at 12. So couldn't wait to get out of home. Wanted to be a nurse, but I was Victorian. So in that, we just changed over to the tertiary system. And all of my older nursing friends just said, if you can do it in the hospitals, do it, because this is a shambles. So this was the first place to move to tertiary nursing education. I was quite lucky in that my parents had friends interstate in WA in Queensland, which were the two states in Australia that still had hospital-based training available. So I applied to a few and eventually ended up in Rockhampton Base Hospital. That's where I trained. That was, 1987 till 1990. That was fun. Those were some of the best years of my life, by the way. We were very naughty, but we had lots of fun and we learned a lot. And that was the beauty of that. We had this fantastic mix of theory and practical, and it's, nursing is very much a hands-on profession, and it sort of baffles me a little bit these days is how do we account for that hands-on side better, because we're not doing that so well these days with the tertiary system. But so that's ended up in Rocky, did my training, moved to the Gold Coast. And this is the funny story about it. So I never intended to be an intensive care nurse. It was so not on my radar, absolutely not. And 6 weeks, I don't know. I applied to the Gold Coast, and when you applied as a fresh graduate back in those days, they just put you somewhere. And they put me in intensive care. And I remember turning up for my first shift. It was a late shift, that was a mistake, because you're supposed to be oriented on an early shift. It was it was a nightmare. And one of my best friends, Nikki Murphy, to this day, I still laugh with her about this story, because she was my mentor, but she was in charge. We had a really sick patient. He was like bleeding to death at one end of the unit, and she'd stuck me in front of a ventilated patient. I had no, I had no idea what I was doing. I was just like, what the? And I remember her screaming at me at one point in the night, never step away from a ventilated patient. And I just remember wanting to burst into tears and go home. And it was awful. And I, to be honest, don't know why I still remained in intensive care after that. But anyway, the next day it went okay. I was on an early shift and it all got sorted. And Nikki is still one of my greatest friends. She's one of my life of friends, and it's hilarious that was my first experience. However, I now recognise that it was exactly where I needed to be because it suits my autistic traits. It's quiet. It's, I'm having to think in really complex sort of thought complexes, blah, blah, blah. Fast forward, that's my career, moved to South Africa, travel, do the backpacking thing, moved to South Africa, did my intensive care, like formal qualification there, fell pregnant with my eldest child and went, I don't particularly want to bring kids up in South Africa because it's not safe. We moved back to Australia, moved to Victoria, and then ended up in Perth and, continued nursing there, I was sort of part-time nursing, being a mum. That's sort of how it plodded along for quite a few years. And then, I had big breaks when I had my babies, blah, 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 all that sort of stuff. And then my ex-husband, he had, there was a family business that I was sort of somewhat involved in at the time, but it was still, nursing was still my primary focus. But I had turned out I had a bit of a good business brain, which I didn't realise was there before. Mm-hmm. And then I went back to uni when I turned 40 and did integrated resource management, Bachelor of Applied Science, which is kind of a third science in terms of, biological science. It's a third economics and a third probably you could categorise it under social science, I suppose. But it's the triple bottom line approach to sort of everything. That was what the program was about. And that really changed things. That's a systems thinking course. And lo and behold, I have a systems thinking brain. And so that was just wonderful. And that's where I learned about wicked problem solving and things like that. And that I always sort of said I would try and bring that back into nursing one day. But at the time I couldn't really see how I could fit those two things together. But it worked well for me in business for a while, and I was farming there for a little while. And then, fast forward to 2023, I got COVID twice in 6 months. Second was Omicron, got really sick. And because that's unmasked a whole bunch of stuff that I'd been probably sitting on a knife edge with, to be honest, for a long time health-wise. That tipped me off. And then I've spent the last couple of years just trying to figure that out and try and sort of, gather, because I'm officially disabled, so I've been TPD'd out, but at the same time, I'm not one of these people who likes to languish in my disability. I refuse to admit defeat. I think I'm a bit of a masochist probably at heart. And so now I'm kind of, it's this noticing opportunity. It became really apparent to me once I got my diagnosis that there are very few resources for this patient cohort. The knowledge base amongst doctors is non-existent, and I say that with absolute great emphasis. It's appalling. To be flipped into being a patient has been an illuminating experience. Let me just say that. It is difficult. The medical system have got an attitude problem. They really do. I find it really quite horrendous. I would make people's hair curl, some of the things that have been said to me by professional doctors. And I'm an intelligent, well-educated individual with a good, strong medical background, and I have an incredibly strong foundation in my own conditions. Anyway, that's a whole other podcast for another day.
But this is what we didn't cover, and I partly would apologise to all the listeners in this, what you've gone on to do as of recent is amazing. And that, I want to get in there and start touching on that. I wrote a couple of quick notes to myself as you were speaking there, and it was from the 17, so a young aspiring professional is thrown into life and death literally on the shift one, which is just, I would say, life-changing straight away, you then, I find, I wrote the word empathy because when I talk to you just about, you have like a profound understanding of the power of life from one perspective, being the person supporting someone potentially dying at that time. And now it's completely flipped and you're on the other side of that and you have these professionals telling you things that you likely know more than them about, right? And so you're going to challenge and just you're going to, I suppose, push against anything because of your foundation in that field. And then you've gone on to create this company, which is aiming to change and fix a lot of those things.
Exactly.
So talk to me just from like the COVID, the back-to-back COVID. Can we jump back in there? So what happened and when did you really start unpacking the diagnostics? Like when did everything start coming through?
So I ended up with a really rare, as it turns out, we didn't know what it was for a really long time. So this rare inflammatory skin condition because of COVID. And it's just like, so COVID, we know that we sort of know now from research that COVID seems to tip people off whatever proverbial health fence they've been sitting. So if you're a little bit susceptible to something chronic, it's likely going to tip your immune system over. So we see that's what long COVID is essentially about. And that's something that I'm actually looking at expanding into because there's very little for patients with long COVID. And then even doctors are really, like it's all a kind of, they're all just gathering data at the moment. I think that's kind of whereas a patient with long COVID, that's not ideal because, you know, whilst they're gathering data, we're still suffering. And it's like we just want something to help us feel a little bit better. And I think there's legitimate things that you can be doing. But again, it's like, how do we get that information out there into the mainstream? So one of the things I learned at university, I did a great course. It was fabulous. And it was essentially an environmental course, but it was teaching, what was it called? Communicating conservation. And the whole course was about how do you communicate to a resistant audience a particular message. And this was, you know, centred around the environment, greenwashing, all that kind of stuff. But, I mean, it's all conceptual principles, so you can take that and plonk it somewhere else. So that's what I've done. And that has been incredibly helpful because one of the trickiest things that I find, and this is, as I'm female, I'm autistic, I'm a registered nurse, but now I'm a patient. But those first three things trigger inherent bias generally in all doctors. Patients who present who have more information than a doctor generally will trigger their ego. And this is the tricky part as a patient. So how do you communicate? Because you're sick. One of the greatest challenges I've had, and I'm articulate as you can hear, but put me in a doctor's office since I've had COVID, I've got brain fog. And if I'm really unwell, because that really interferes with how your brain chemistry is functioning, I struggle to articulate what's going on. And then because you're faced and I already know before I walk in the door, I'm probably going to face bias. So, you know, you're already gearing up for that. And then when you do get faced with it, it kind of makes you tongue-tied. And that's really, now, okay, so I'm an intensive care nurse with a science degree and I'm a good communicator, and yet I struggle in that environment. So what does that say for people out there who have none of that as their background? So then I sort of started to go, there's got to be a better solution. There's got to be an answer to this. And my eldest daughter thought I was absolutely flippin' nutso when I suggested creating an app, because I'm sure that we can do this with an app. They're like, serious, it's like an Excel spreadsheet just put into an app. Like, we've got to be able to do this. And that's essentially how I went about it. And she literally called me stupid. She said, that's so expensive, like you're an idiot, blah, 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 blah. Never work. And I was like, no, I'm going to do it anyway. And I luckily, you know, found a great app company. They got my vision, which was good. Got my Excel spreadsheet, which is the basis of all of this. That was great. So we set it up, and I already knew based on, so this is where I go to the market and look for feedback. So I spend a lot of time in social media groups just looking at what people are saying because I want to know what people need. So if I'm going to set this thing up, what are the biggest criticisms that I have around, say, diagnostic criteria currently? Because this is where the challenge sits. Because we know, and they're redoing that, there's a new one coming out next year, but like the one we have at the moment from 2017 is really limited. It doesn't capture a lot of the more complex metabolic things that go on in this condition. So again, it's this, okay, well, hang on a minute. This stuff's in the literature. Why is it not in the criteria? So how can we account for that? So I came up with a weighting system for so I find, proper peer-reviewed literature to support whatever the question is. This is for in the app, so you answer a series of questions and it gives you a likelihood at the end as to whether you'll have these conditions. And the questions themselves, though, are all come from scientific literature, but not all literature is the same, if that makes sense. So from a science perspective, we know that some literature should be more highly weighted than others because of where it's come from, maybe, might be a limited sample, blah, blah, blah. There's lots of reasons. So I went about doing that. So I sorted all of my literature that I took my questions from and gave them a weighting score. So that, because and I didn't realise that this was actually quite a remarkable thing that I've stumbled across and came up with. And it wasn't because I went and studied, this year I've actually studied AI in healthcare at Harvard Medical School. And we had 600 of some of the most brilliant scientists, doctors, researchers in the world in this cohort. I was quite intimidated at the beginning because I'm like, oh, my Lord, what am I doing here? I suffer from imposter syndrome really, really badly at times. So I just thought, well, hang on a minute. My Connect ED app is ideal as my capstone project. Like, this is what this whole course is about. I've already done it. Most of the cohort were actually just conceptualising their ideas, whereas I've already built mine. It's out there in the market. But this actually became a really good means for me to be able to test its rigour, because that's something I hadn't been able to do, because it's how do you access that?
It's so brilliant.
And I finished top 4 and I presented to investors the entire cohort and the faculty at the end. And one of the pieces of feedback I got was a stroke of brilliance, the algorithm itself that we've come up with in terms of the weighting side of it, and the fact that it was very patient forward. Because one of the things that AI is trying to bridge is this huge chasm between patient and caregiver, particularly doctors. And this bridges that gap, which is entirely what I intended it to do. So in my head, this makes perfect autistic sense to me. But does it make sense to the rest of the world? I'm not sure. Yes, it does. It's a world first. There is no other product in the world that is actually doing this. The potential for these sorts of platforms are enormous in healthcare, particularly in chronic conditions and rare and complex conditions that are just not well recognised by doctors. Because often the patient will recognise they have something but we still have doctors who will accuse you of going to Dr. Google, which I find ironic given that 9 times out of 10, when I'm in a doctor's office and I ask them something they're not sure about, the first thing they do is go look at Google.
Correct.
Correct. That's a gaslight. So this is the subtle gaslighting that doctors will do to patients.
So in a way, the concept started in not farming, but for lack of a better word, farming the social groups to figure out where the queries were.
Yeah.
Using the background of what you had in medic, going off a weighted system of sorts to go, this is most applicable based on this literature, and basically matching those.
Yeah.
And then prioritizing the wait list, I'm assuming, based on the severity.
Yeah. So the weighting is 3, 2, 1. So the strongest literature is 3.
Oh, amazing. Yeah, I got it.
So when you add that in as a multiplier into your formula.
Got it. So you essentially have the compounding knowledge of every doctor.
Yes.
Against old mate who's the local GP telling you.
Yes.
It's brilliant.
Because it's weighted.
Of course.
And the other side of that, so one of the things that I do a lot of work and research on is bias, because it's something you face all the time. So this is something that I've come to recognise is a massive problem in the biomedical model, is bias inherently. I think it's built into the system inherently, which is problematic. The power differentials are enormous and it's problematic. It needs to be addressed. And, you know, AHPRA are busy trying to do that. Doctors have a code of conduct in Australia. I don't know whether most doctors aren't even aware that they have a code of conduct, which is scary. And in that, it is very much around patient empowerment, partnership, collaborative medicine, patient being well, properly, informed consent requires you to have all of your. So informed consent requires doctors to explain all of your options, not just the ones that they think apply to you, which actually doesn't happen in reality. They'll just tell you what they think. I challenge that all the time.
Of course you would.
Again, that gets me into hot water all the time. But I still think I should do it because it's not my problem, it's their problem. But again, that's a tricky one when you're trying to get care.
But the app is the gap between the less informed.
Yeah, and it's fully referenced. It's got all of, when you get the report at the end, like if it flags you as a likely for the conditions, you get the report. And in that report, though, we've included all of the diagnostic criteria and tools. They're in the report. So the doctor, when the GP is sitting there with you going through and the beauty of it's linear as well. So under each bodily system, we have a list of symptoms for that particular patient, which fits their linear brain thoughts because that's how they think. That's got to be like in a straight line. That's where they then are able to see patterns. I see patterns everywhere, but they need linear structure to see that. And then it takes, it also provides them with information. And this is what I came up with in that course at uni. And I actually got an article published in the IUCN journal, actually, which was pretty cool about this. So we wrote a children's book. That was what we did. And they asked me, why would you do that? And I said, well, it's a simple solution. I said, it's pitched at under 5 because you have 2 audiences for that book. Because kids under 5 can't read to themselves.
I already get it.
You and I think that's kind of a no-brainer, but that's not how most people think. But that was, and this goes to your thing, what is it? Hustle harder, hustle smarter. It's exactly that mentality. Like I'm constantly looking for like simpler ways and easier ways, more efficient ways to do things. I think, again, that's how my brain works.
We have to get into, we're going to run this again. We're going to go again. I'm locked to a 30-minute slot.
How long have we gone?
We could go for an hour and a half, 2 hours. We could spend the day.
Make this a part 1 and we'll do a part 2.
Just kill the cameras and we'll just carry on. Where can they find you? I'm
www.connectedhealth.au is our website. We're currently, that's a one-pager, which is just what you need. You need a landing page for the app, and we did that. It was a bit fast and dirty at the time. It's got all the basics there, but we're currently, so I'm using Maria from Sustainable Marketing Services. She's awesome, by the way. Anybody who wants any marketing done, she's fabulous. And the beauty for me, and this is Kismet, this is totally the universe just doing mysterious things.
Thanks for checking out another episode of Good Company. If you enjoyed this show, I'm sure you'll like many others just like this one. Check out the show notes and the links for free resources by clicking the links above and below.